Hello, everybody, and welcome along for another one of these amazing interviews here with me, Ben Calder, for the Bowen Therapy Professional Association, the BTPA. And wow, have we got an exciting one for you today. I'm super excited that we're going to be talking to Gil Hedley, famous for his Integral Anatomy series that he's been teaching in Dissection Laboratory via keynote and speaking tours and online via his extensive website and subscription portal, which is gilhedley.com, his YouTube channel, Somanor, all the way since 1995. He's the producer of that famous Integral Anatomy series that many of us Bowen practitioners were tuned into, and also Anatomy from A to Z project and the Nerve project, of which he's been on an extended speaking tour looking at the nerve tree in relationship, which is beautiful stuff. We'll talk more about that. He's also the author of several books and anatomy models, and he's based at the Institute for Anatomical Research in Colorado Springs, where he teaches, films, and serves as a board president. He has a PhD in theological ethics and is also trained in rolfing, psychodynamics, and energy healing. And this is a really, really exciting one for us to have here today. And I'm super glad that Gil's been grateful enough to give us his time to talk to us about his work. So I hope you enjoy this as much as we do. Remember to subscribe, drop a like, drop a comment, all that rubbish that helps our channel do better. Thanks so much. Let's get on with the interview. Gil, hi. Thank you very much for joining me today. I really appreciate you giving your time today.
My pleasure, Ben. Happy to visit with you and your community.
Thank you. Thank you. So for me, you've been a bit of a legend in the Bowen world ever since I started. So I trained in 2010, and at that point, your Integral Anatomy series was kind of postulated to us as just this key piece of information that was going to be really good in helping us to understand anatomy and understand the body. And so to me, I feel like I'm meeting and speaking to somebody who's had a really important influence on my work over the last 14, 15 years or so. The language that you were using in Integral Anatomy really spoke to me quite deeply at that time. And I want to get into some of your history in a little bit so that I can ask some specific questions about that. But for some of the people who are listening, we know that we've got students, we know we've got members of the public, we know we've got people that have been doing Bowen for a long, long time, but there may be people here who haven't heard of you before or don't know your work very well. Can you give us a bit of an introduction to who you are and what got you involved in what you're doing and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I have a long-standing interest in things bodily that kind of went on pause in college and graduate school, and then was rekindled at the very end of my graduate studies when I realized I was going to graduate with a degree. I didn't want to be a professor. So I was like, I got into Tai Chi in grad school, and that got me into hands-on, acupressure style massage. And then my mom got rolfed, and I was amazed at the impact on her tissue. It changed texture because I was used to giving her Tai Chi massages, and she went from being a 2x4 to being soft butter. I was very impressed. And so I looked into the work of Dr. Ida Rolf and went to the Rolf Institute and trained as a body worker. And as I was out beginning to practice, I was like, oh, dang, I need to know more anatomy. And so I got into the lab and started studying. It was helpful to be Dr. Gil at that point because I could call the university and say, hello, this is Dr. Hedley. I would like a cadaver in the laboratory, please. And they're like, okay. So I made a lot of cold calls and got into laboratories and started teaching, but I couldn't do what the medical folks were doing, really. They have, their regional anatomy approach. I looked at the regional anatomy texts. I looked at the regional anatomy dissectors. I brought them into the lab with me and found it to be completely and painfully and emotionally disturbingly incoherent with the whole body approach I had learned at the Rolf Institute and this sense of whole body textural layers that we had been trained to feel. And so when I got into the laboratory, I was like, well, what if I dissected to that rather than to the regions? of the regional anatomy work, and that led to integral anatomy. That led to kind of a whole body, an interest in continuity and relationship more than separation, division, naming, and taxonomy. So that's kind of how integral anatomy was born.
Wow, incredible. That's such an easy way to get to where you did, just to have a look at that. And I've always been intrigued by the choice of the name as well, because sort of around 2009, 2010, I started coming across Ken Wilber's integral theory and looking at that. I'd been a kinesiologist since 2003, and we had what I would see as a holistic model to work with, but it didn't really encompass some of the same amount of information as Ken's integral model. And I've always wondered whether that had any influence on you while you were in college and in your work as well.
Absolutely not. I'd never heard of Ken Wilber when I developed that language myself.
Sure.
And many people would say, "Oh, Gil, you should read Ken Wilber. He's an integral guy." I reached out to Ken Wilber. He had absolutely no interest in talking to me. I went from Boulder, though, and I had studied in Boulder, and so I thought there might be some overlap. But honestly, I just made it up. And when I did finally just look a little bit into Ken Wilber's work, I was like, "Oh, no, that's not me. I got a whole other thing going on here." And so I let his integral be his integral and my integral be my integral. I think we both have an intention that's shared to have a more comprehensive way in. And so kudos to him for exploring that so deeply. And I kind of took it on my own path. I mean, I can be very specific in my own sense of what I mean by integral anatomy is really a juxtaposition to regional anatomy. So if regional anatomy is interested, as briefly mentioned, in the separation of the body into parts to be named and classified in taxonomies, I'm not opposed to that and stand next to regional anatomy with integral anatomy, where the focus of the lens is more broad, and I'm interested to not leave the body separated into a pile of parts. I don't dissect in order to create that pile of parts. I dissect in order to feel into the relationships of those things before they became parts. So I don't go to the lab and dissect, hoping to repeat the history of regional anatomy. I go into the lab in order to notice how those regions are actually simply projections onto the whole. And that is what I'm very interested in. And those continuities and relationships are where I focus my attention with a view to completing the process, right? So if we witness the whole, and then as we look more deeply, we see differences, right? And those differences are interesting and compelling. There's nothing wrong with being compelled and interested in those differences. But if where the mind perceives difference, we then impute separation and conclude to objects rather than continuing on to explore how those parts may be related, and then adding those relationships and continuities to our conceptualization of the body. It becomes much more complete, much more whole when I dissect and feel as I'm taking the tissues apart, not so I can get myself a liver and something else, but so that I can see, like, oh, look at that. And then when I feel that, and I show that on camera as well, I show myself feeling it. It conveys a sense of texture, a sense of the strength or ephemeral quality of the relationship. Some relationships are more ephemeral than others. So if I can explore into those ephemeral relationships, and that gives me a sense of how those tissues might have differential movement. When there's maybe a fibrous relationship, I see how there may be leverage between those tissues, and it adds a volumes of information and allows me to literally remember myself, to bring the members back together from that parts conceptualization into the whole that I always have been and always will be.
Wow. Beautiful. So succinctly put. And I love the fact that you've put the Ken Wilber side of it to bed for me so easily as well. That's really nice. For you, what's that deeper value in being able to work in that more holistic sense, in that integral sense? Why do you see that as being an advantage over a more regional state of anatomy?
Well, the thing about regional anatomy is the model is reductive, right? In other words, it's an abstracting process of separating and differentiating in that way. again, for the sake of words and taxonomies and a sense of the body as a machine, because if you reduce it to its parts, you can identify this machine as is. And integral anatomy is more aligned with nature as mirror than machine as mirror. And I do find that to be more accurate. Just, in other words, I find that regional anatomy completes the process that has been begun with regional anatomy. If you just stop at regional anatomy, you're left with an abstract set of parts that are not what it is. Like, it's a lie. Ultimately, every time I put my scalpel to the body, I lie. I reduce it to something that is not. And then there's a tremendous philosophical error that occurs where that type of modeling becomes taken for reality. And then we can't get ourselves back together from there. It's very hard to reclaim and experience the whole, which to my mind is closer to the truth than the parts. And so maybe that's the thrust of it, the hope that we can actually have a deeper experience of the whole, of the continuities of the whole, which is, to my mind, closer to reality than the abstract reduction of reality that enables us to chat about it, but we shouldn't believe our words too much. And we tend to. You see people fall for the model as reality, accept it, and then live fractionated, separated from self, other, from the body. The body becomes other. People become other. And the whole world becomes other. It becomes a thing apart, and we upon it, And so that's, to my mind, not quite it. And the body has taught me that lesson, because as I've attempted to differentiate those tissues, if you actually pay attention to the fact that you're having to cut it apart to get to where you want to go, you're lying all the way. And the process of dissection can become an endless, constant, and necessary reaffirmation of the whole, of the continuities, of the connections that are the reality, as opposed to the parts and the things that we turn it into, the nouns that we reduce the universe to. And so I guess maybe I'm on a quest for reality, and I have found that reality is continuous and whole. And when you have that experience, it's profound. And if you have that experience, then you're not separate from me. You are continuous with me, and me becomes part of that whole continuity, not this terrified object in space hurtling towards death, right? In other words, what a way to live, right? To imagine yourself as a body separate, rather than as the conscious whole.
Yeah, incredible. Wow. It's just so rich. We're only 10 minutes into the conversation, and already my mind is really loving what you're sharing. And it's one of the things I really loved about the Integral Anatomy series that you created, was the way that you put in so many images with nature, and we're talking about those relationships between nature. But for you, was that kind of informed in your study through theological ethics, through the psychodynamic study that you did? Did you already have that bent to want to understand the body as that part of nature rather than something that was separate there?
Oh, yeah. No, I showed up as separated and abstract as it could possibly be with a PhD in theological ethics from the University of Chicago. You can't get into a more meta mind frame, a more abstract, disembodied thought process than that. So if anything, I was trying to recover from the dramatic falsification of the whole universe that my graduate studies led me to. And I don't mean to dismiss it completely, because I did learn how to think in graduate school. And that was super valuable, because we don't have a whole lot of critical thinking going on in our culture today, certainly not in our media. So I enjoy being able to sort of deploy my critical thinking skills as I bring it into a completely different field, that being, study of the body. But I did find myself as a graduate student in ethics, getting my PhD, to be in a kind of, what do they call it, imposter syndrome or something. In other words, where we're all postulating things about the body, considering rules of behavior, studying moral systems that are often concerning themselves with matters bodily. right? With no attempt at embodiment to inform the consciousness around those thought processes. So who the hell are you to be telling anybody what to do about their body without even being in the body? How can that be? So I was very involved in what you might call family ethics in the Catholic, in the field of the Catholic religion. And so here we are going on and on about this and that bodily, and I'm thinking, wow, you get kind of bossy, kind of top down with respect to the body. Do you not see this miracle before you as possibly carrying a kind of divine intelligence that could be conveyed to you if you dared to listen to what the body has to say, rather than making rules from it on high in a sort of a priori, high principle applied, and to hell with you if it doesn't quite fit you. That's your fault for getting on Earth, and now you have to suffer these principles and the consequences of this legalistic domain over the body. And so I felt a deep discomfort with that and thought, no, I kind of want to get into my body. I kind of want to actually experience this gift rather than hate on it, because there's a whole lot of hate on the body in many philosophies and religions. And I thought, well, what maybe the body's smarter than you think. And maybe if you indulge, in the study of the body, you might be humbled by its intelligence, and you might find your ethics and your behavioral practice transformed by that wisdom that we can tap into.
So do you consider us then to be much more of a bottom-up system then than a top-down?
Again, it's kind of a decision. You can approach it either way and suffer accordingly. So if you approach it top-down, there's a lot of suffering, in my mind, caused by that top-down approach. But if we make space for nature, the intelligence of nature, which we find so beautifully expressed in our embodied form, if we make space for that, it might be a little less oppressive. But then again, oppression is often the name of the game. So if you like to oppress, by all means, make rules about the body all day long. But if you want to have a different kind of peace in your relationship with nature, you might want to listen rather than tell. So I really did not show up with this perspective. I mean, I've always loved trees. I couldn't fit that. I was climbing them as a small child, but once I looked into the body, let me put it this way: I was raised and professed a religion that told me that I was cast out from the garden, right? And that there was this dramatic separation of me and the garden. And what I have found through the exploration of the body is that the garden is within. And that garden within, when deeply contemplated, puts one in a completely different relationship with the once seeming garden without. And instead of there being a garden without, there's just one garden. I am in the garden. I am the garden. I am continuous with the garden. And I see myself everywhere now. I cannot look around me and fail to witness the reflection of the garden within in the garden without. And they are continuous. And it's a beautiful thing to know that you're continuous with the garden. And it changes your relationship with that garden, because you're a little less likely to murder it when you are it, right? We have sort of a self-preservation mode, but if the self that you conceive is just your body at war with the world, it will create a very different world than if you recognize yourself to be continuous with the garden and therefore not at war with it, but in continuity and relationship with it.
Wonderful. So, if we look at the world around us, there's no doubt that, especially in the Western world, we're seeing an increasing deterioration in health and well-being within people. And from your perspective, do you consider that to be because we've got this top-down way of looking at ourselves, this disconnected from nature, the not understanding those relationships in how it is us, we are it, we're all one together?
Yeah, that's part of it. And I think a lot of our lack of health yeah, it certainly comes from a deep distrust of nature rather than a sense of relationship with it. But also, we're just, certain levels of our culture are bent on poisoning, and so, and we've tolerated that poisoning in a way that is uncomfortable for me, and that is uncomfortable for all of us. I don't know if ever on the history of the planet has there been more chronic disease than there is right now, and it is absolutely and incontrovertibly a reflection of our of the toxicity that we've introduced into our own environment. We've poisoned our own well. We could do better.
I absolutely agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And are there any people, are there any organizations, any structures that you're witnessing around you that are trying to bring that healthier way back into life for us?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of energy in the United States right now, although God forbid you should speak of it. But someone like Robert Kennedy Jr. and his Make America Healthy Again, in company with Tulsi Gabbard, they have brought a lot of energy and awareness to that I think is intuitively correct. When you look at the sort of the stats on human wellness in our country, we're not doing so well. We don't have great health in our country right now, and people are experiencing that. There's a lot of sick children. There's a huge percentage of children who are early diagnosed with chronic lifelong illnesses that were unnamed because not present, 50 years ago. In my lifetime, we weren't so sick when I was a kid, but there's epidemic issues that there's a tremendous resistance to allow people to communicate about the actual sources of those problems. But I've looked too far.
Yeah, sure. How do you see how your work is contributing then towards the turning of the tide and the movement into a healthier, more integrated direction for us?
Well, I flatter myself to think that I've had any impact at all. So I hesitate to even imagine that I do. But I do find that when I bring groups of people together in the laboratory or on my tour and create a sense of connection between people and a sense of connection of people with the glorious internal beauty and profound intelligence, that it gives one pause to say, oh, what have I been so contradictory about? Why have I been so alienated? Why have I felt this disconnection that seems to have abated for a moment here? And I do spend some time, in my current endeavor of presenting this Nerve Tour story throughout the country and soon around the world. I put some energy into the discussion of right and left brain differences. And I feel that I've been working with that implicitly throughout my career by developing integral anatomy, which is an absolutely very right-brained orientation. In terms of the kind of consciousness style of our right hemisphere, integral anatomy is very much a reflection of our right brain consciousness style, witnessing the whole, witnessing continuity, witnessing relationship, and appreciating the world from that perspective. Also focusing on the uniqueness, the individuality, and the newness of each person. Right? It's very much a focus of integral anatomy. It's very much one of the capacities of our perceptual style in our right hemisphere, while as the left hemisphere, right, would be that which parses the world out into pieces. Right, the left brain separates and differentiates in such a way as to name and objectify, to categorize, and to type things. Right, the left brain literally can't see a face. It doesn't recognize the individual. It sees a type, and we can see that juxtaposition because both are adaptive, both are valuable. If you can't differentiate the world into parts, you will not be able to navigate it. You will die. Right, so the left brain's ability to differentiate and objectify is life-giving. And I do not mock it. I do not oppose it. But I do not stop there either, right? Because the left brain, left to its own devices, becomes very destructive, right? For its failure to witness and appreciate the newness and preciousness of the individual. It turns everybody into types, and it hates some of them and loves some of them and causes a lot of murder and mayhem on the planet. When we leave out the completion of the witnessing of the word process, that must include that right brain's appreciation of the whole, appreciation for metaphor, for poetry, for relationship and continuity. So we can't just separate ourselves out into sheep and goats and then murder all the goats, which has happened many times on this planet, over and over again. And I see it, as a moment in time where we've lost track of our whole brain, literally, because if the whole brain were involved in a decision-making process or a witnessing of a situation, then we'd have that continuity and relationship added back to our capacity to navigate the world through its objects. And then we could possibly recover ourselves from those horrid examples of mayhem that have been unleashed on the planet when that moment in the thought process has been left out. I have to give credit to the reflections of the British author Ian McGilchrist, who so profoundly discussed these issues in his epic called The Master and His Emissary, which is a deep study into hemispheric differences and the way that hemispheric differences become reflected in our production of culture, in our production of society, and our way of navigating society. It's quite a profound book, but it's super hard to read. Sorry, Ian. It's thick and dense and profound, and therefore has the potential to be ignored in a culture where sound bites are more welcome, and also where maybe even truth isn't so welcome because it's so confronting at this point. And it would rather have the other person be confronted than ourselves be confronted. We'd rather have a whole categories on the planet be separated from ourselves than actually face the division in our own brain and the way that we've failed to connect. The disconnect is within us. It's not between us. But when the disconnect is within us, it becomes between us. And then we imagine it's the other who's at fault rather than owning our own self-reduction in the way that I'm seeing it expressed all over the planet.
Yeah, it's certainly harder for the eye to see itself. And we're all much happier swallowing those comfortable lies than we are trying to take the hard truths. But, with people like you speaking, as you mentioned, a little more about nerve core as well, because I love the subtext in that, exploring the nerve tree in relationship. Tell me a little bit more about what you're covering within the talk.
Yeah, sure. So I undertook a project last year, January through May. So it was January, February, March, April, May, 5 months in the laboratory straight. Just working with a single donor form, specifically focusing on understanding the relationships of the nerve tissues to other tissues, their continuities, their textures, to see if I could witness so much of the nerve tree, as I like to call it, witness so much of the nerve tree that I've heard about, but I haven't ever gotten around to dissecting because it is extremely challenging to do the dissections that I did. It was challenging, time-consuming, tedious, physically painful, like bent over the table in the most uncomfortable positions for the longest amounts of times over the course of months. And so I totally get why it doesn't get done, because it's friggin' painful to actually do it. That being said, for having done it, I was able to gather just a wonderful pile of images and videos that I could draw from to tell a story that might be uplifting with respect to this incredible dimension of our our human form. And so about, more than a year ago now, it's a year and a half now. A year ago, June, my friend Eric Dalton had a conference in Oklahoma City. He invited me to speak at it. And since it was in late June, I had just completed the nerve project. So it was quite natural for me to try and tell a story about the nerve tissues to that particular audience. There was about 250 people there. I was given a 3-hour slot. I went on for 3.5 hours with images from the thing. It was so well received that I walked to the back of the room and I said to my partner in all things, Rachel, I think we should take this on the road. This seems to be a good thing. And so we both agreed to it instantaneously. She's a Gemini. I'm a Libra. 2 air signs getting together to make a decision takes about 3 seconds. And so we committed to this thing. And then we sat down in our living room and got home from Oklahoma City, spent 3 weeks in front of the television with the big screen, with the Google map and of the United States and Canada. And we mapped it out until we had over 100 cities planned. And then we announced it and said, hey, folks, we're coming to everywhere. And it's been nothing but all hell broke loose since in attempting to manage the profoundly overwhelming tsunami of administrative tasks that come with booking over 100 cities and lining thousands of people up to come. And so it's been a real amazing experience. We've traveled around the country in RV delivering this conversation really about our nervous system and how are we using this great gift, and inviting people in the moment actually to have experiences of it, both through the visual impact of the presentation, but also through various exercises that I invite folks to engage in that kind of ups your level of relationship both to your own and transforms your own relationship to your own nervous system and hopefully others as well. And then the whole thing is framed in this more very personal story because the donor that I explored for the nerve project was a personal friend and the father of my main assistant in the lab. So to be working on a familiar form, literally like part of the family of my team, and so intimately familiar, and to have that sort of healing and grieving process all be wrapped up into the project itself, then becomes part of the larger story that I share, and it's just another level of engagement of the whole person. That's always my intention. Every donor was someone's family member, so you can make that very personal.
Always. Yeah. So what are some of the key insights? What are some of the key takeaways from that nerve tree and relationship you've been sharing on the tour?
Well, one thing is that our autonomic nervous system need not be a fantasy, right? It need not be something we've heard about or read about. It can be something you can actually witness and engage. I think that's really important to know that we're not victims of our nervous system. We can engage and reset our relationship with our nervous systems, which I think is really important to know that we have that agency, that capacity when our nervous systems have been so brutally hijacked presently by our the mind of the current culture on the planet, which would really there's I like the phrase that I got from Daniel Schmechtenberg. He's an amazing thinker, and he talks about limbic hijacking. I don't know that he originated it, but that's just where I'd heard the phrase limbic hijacking. So we have a lot of limbic hijacking going on where the whole planet is in like fight or flight frenzy. And it's like, oh, well, actually, we can shift that. We can actually, again, taking that self-responsibility. How are we using our brain? How are we using our own nervous system? Or are we just handing over the reins of this galloping chariot to someone else, to some other levels of agency that aren't our own. So then we might, adjust our relationship to that. I think that's an important opportunity. But to my mind, I'm a total hands-on visual combination person. So I want to touch it. I want to see it. I suspect that if someone else hasn't seen it, they're not really getting it. And so I want to show the tissue so that folks can be like, oh, I can engage with that now. I see that pathway within myself. And then if I go within myself, I can connect to that in an embodied way and then embody my nervous system in a different way. So that's one of the key takeaways, other than the fact that it's really cool and fancy and amazing. It's just also something to be treasured, because if you don't treasure something as an amazing gift, you'll be flippant and take it for granted and think, oh, that's something other than me, and will be willfully ignorant at that point. So there's also this thing. I did this A to Z project before I did our project, Anatomy from A to Z, which was a massive, massive undertaking. It was a 3-year-long project between the year and a half of dissecting and year and a half of editing. And, I thought, okay, I just produced something and put it online, a couple hundred hours worth of visual content that I think will keep the massage industry, the Pilates world, the yoga folks, the fitness professionals, I'll keep them busy for the next 50 years with this content. And then I thought, but what about the naturopaths? What about the osteopaths? What about the physiotherapists and physical therapists? And the chiropractors and the allopaths, even if they dare condescend to learn something, which they do, to the credit of many. What about the nerve tissues? They really love that stuff. I'm saying, and I have not counted for it as completely as I might, given my layer by layer approach, which kind of prunes the tree really hard, right? So you prune the tree really hard, you see these amazing layers and continuities, but then, I have to do a very different dissection style to actually reveal the nervous tissues. So by doing that different dissection style, so I could reveal those nervous tissues, I think I just produced another 50 years worth of information for the physical therapists, the osteopaths, the chiropractors, the naturopaths, the physios, the PTs, the OTs. And so I'm proud of that. I'm proud of, this opportunity to kind of beef up my content. And also, the upshot of that is that all those other professions that I formerly said would have themselves busy for 50 years are now engaged in the nervous tissues in a way that they might not have been otherwise. So by bringing this around to thousands and thousands of people at these many presentations, now there's like an interest, right? I'm literally just Johnny Appleseed planting interest in the nervous tissues, which might seem to be maybe beyond the scope of practice or sense of the knowledge frame or educational base of massage therapists and the like. But it's not, actually. It's not. You're engaging it from the moment someone walks in the room. You're engaging it from the moment you wake up in the morning. The question is, are you conscious of the fact that you're involved in this engagement or not? So I'm trying to bring some awareness of that, and then maybe the content will last 100 years instead of just 50. So,
I really love that as well. And I love this concept of limbic hijacking. I mean, in reference back into your own Tai Chi practice, I've been practicing Qigong for 34 years, and it's, for me, a fundamental way of really self-regulating. And I picked it up because I was a very regulated teenager, and it gave me a way of actually starting to support and regulate myself, and very much a lesson that I try and pass on to people that I work with, that we have a choice about how our nervous system is responding, and that we can, have a relationship with it. We can condition it. We can train it to deal with the world in a very different way than the one that we seem to assume that we're victims toward.
Yes, exactly. And folks who are saying, oh, I can't calm down because I'm too frantic. It's like, hold on there. Actually, you can. It's for you to do it. In fact, it's kind of your responsibility. And because you're actually creating a cloud around you that reflects that state. And the world looks a certain way when you're in those states. And the world looks very differently when you're in other states. It slows down a bit. It's not as scary. It's a little more welcoming. The planet, is actually within you, and the what you project into the world based on that, is very much evident all around us, each one of us.
Yeah, beautiful. Is there anything as well within the way, with what you've discovered, with what you've explored within the anatomy, is there anything that has really fundamentally changed for you in the way that you look at the world, look at the body, look at humans and life? And is there anything that you've kind of like really just believed in the past, but with your exploration, you can no longer hold on to those beliefs?
Absolutely. I no longer believe in things. I know them to only be projections and reductions of reality. And I got that from the body. So say you've learned the muscles and studied your flashcards and as I did, as everyone did who did any bodywork modality, right? And you memorized them, and now you know the pec major versus the pec minor. But then now go to the body, the actual tissues, and you have to cut that out of something to create it, something that wasn't on the flashcard, right? No, what was on the flashcard is this discrete unit, pectoralis major, pectoralis minor, a discrete unit, an anatomical unit. And then you believed those anatomical units to be both functional units and real when they're not. They're actually just cutting conventions. And so I came through cutting the body to be part of the stream of the cutting conventions of history, right? You look at a book and then you try and cut that out. It's like, well, can you pause for a second and realize what you're doing? What are you doing? You are constructing a reality with a knife that wouldn't be so otherwise. And so when I get in between pectoralis major and pectoralis minor as named tissues, conceptualized and projected on the body, I don't get to that till like the third day of the dissection, because I have to reflect the skin, I have to reflect the subcutaneous adipose, and no matter what you choose to call it, the superficial fascia or superficial and deep adipose, blah, 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 it doesn't matter. There's a fatty layer that has a particular buoyant texture. And then if you really pay attention, you'll see that there's a membrane deep to that in a large percentage of its undersurface. And that membrane itself has a different texture, different tissue composition than other tissues. And then as you scrape that down a bit, then you come into this fibrous matter like a grid, and you're like, oh, there's another texture, and you still have in muscle tissue yet, right? And so pectoralis major is a profound mental projection on the body and abstraction. You have to dig it out of the body, then you have to carve it away from its neighbors by disrupting this membranous relationship. And you see, oh, they said that the origin and insertion of this muscle tissue was A, and B, the origin and the insertion. But it turns out that there's no air otherwise around in there, and that over 100% of the surface of this tissue, right, there is a relationship. Why have the origin and insertion been prioritized and all of these other relationships been tossed in the bucket, right? So if you pay attention while you're touching the form, you'll come to see that one can give an accounting for the relationship of that muscle tissue over 100% of its surface. Oh, here it has a membranous relationship. Here it has a fibrous relationship. Here it has this kind of leverage. Here it has differential movement, and the fallout of that building of a much greater story is the acknowledgement of wholeness, right? And if it's so easy to miss what some would say maybe is a more subtle relationship of the muscle tissue rather than a more obvious mechanical leverage, say, well, look, it's attached to the rib cage there, and I got to cut it apart. It's not attached. It's just differentiated. It's one embryo. differentiating, right? So there's no attachment. It's just continuous. It's one thing. And it may take me some effort to cut it off of that with my scalpel. But having done so, the tissue is still completely in relationship to the body, although there was no accounting for the rest of those relationships in the flashcard, no accounting for the nerve tissue. They may be named them, but we want to account for them as a physical continuity, right? As part of the structure that you can witness to. So, having then, had this experience of the wholeness that I have to disrupt in order to create the parts, and having originally perceived a subtle relationship as non-existent, then it leads you to a question, possibly, if you dare ask it. What of this subtle relationship between you and me? Right? Is there something that I might be missing in what I imagine to be two separate entities? Is there something missing that I haven't accounted for in the same way that I didn't account for all those relationships of the muscle tissues to every other tissue in the body, to other muscle tissues, to the fascia, to the et cetera, to the viscera, blah, 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 right? So if I so easily fail to recognize what are obvious physical connections in the tissues that can only be disrupted with your hand or a knife or a ravenous wolf, right? Then what have I missed elsewhere? And then your eyes, the scales fall from your eyes, and like, oh my gosh, this stuff is actually kind of thick. There's actually some. It's not so subtle. Our connections, it's not so subtle at all. And if I were to start berating you in this conversation and humiliating you and shaming you and treating you like garbage, it will change your physiology instantly. Right. And if I'm here loving on you and engaging with you and enjoying our relationship and conversation, that is also expressed in your physiology because we're continuous. We're differentiated from the same ball of consciousness. Right. And I'm no more separate than the cells of our body from one another. And ultimately, that ought to blow your mind. It's blown my mind, and it came straight from the laboratory. It came just from digging in the universe, digging in this universe of the body and paying attention to how it might impact my understanding of the larger world around me. And it's like, whoa, yeah, it's not subtle at all, the connections between us. It might be invisible to the eye, right? But we feel them deeply. We're transformed by them profoundly. And our own expression of consciousness from this particular point and vantage is completely impacting the texture of our world and our sense of relationship, for better or for worse. And you can do it consciously or unconsciously. You can become conscious of your impact on the world, or you can remain unconscious and blame the world for your life.
I love how you're describing that, Gil. And as a reflection back to you on that, my body definitely can feel the impact of what you're saying. I'm sat here and I'm very aware of myself as we're having the conversation, which is really beautiful. And it's something that I know I reflect with the people I work with, is that part of the process that we're undertaking is about our relationship. And that's not just in terms of the things we say or the things we share or exchange, but when it comes down to how my touch is going to have an effect on you and what that is going to create, and having interviewed a number of the kind of the long-term teachers and their stipulation that your state and the presence that you are expressing when you're in connection with another person is fundamental to the outcomes of the Bowen work that we're doing.
Beautiful and so true. It's so true, and I delight in know that the Bowen people have that consciousness or attempt it, and then we can only invite that everywhere. It's such an intimate thing to touch another person. Do you touch them as with empathy and humility, or do you touch them with superiority and a sense of difference? rather than a sense of connection. In other words, can we be real in the presence of a client? Posture,
Sure. And that makes a massive difference in the outcome that you have, because again, many people have had experiences of dealing with any kind of authority in a space, but especially within a medical or in a health field, and how that person is engaging with you, how they're treating with you, how they're communicating with you, has a profound difference on how you move forward with whatever it is that you've engaged them for.
Yeah, it's so true. And what encounter that we have with one another is not an opportunity to convey hope, love, appreciation, respect, humility. So much more fun than being an asshole.
Yeah, thankfully. I'm kind of curious as well. Something that kind of came up for me as you were speaking as well, and again, just the nature of the way you express yourself is, it's very exciting for me. And I was curious again because of, for me, this link into Qigong and how we do acknowledge within Bowen the relationship between the acupuncture channels and the nature of the kind of the chi, the primal energy within the body. I'm wondering, within your work, is there anything that has given you insights or understandings of that Chinese model based on the work that you're doing?
I have to say, I've thought about it quite a bunch, actually. I do find those modalities to be quite profound and impactful, but I also hesitate to reduce them, to reduce those models to templates that can be dissected out of the body, for instance. In other words, I don't need for the acupuncture channels to be physical in my conceptualization of the form. I'm not a materialist, despite the great amount of time I've spent bopping around in the material. And I don't need an energetic model to be correlated one-to-one to the physical, because even in the physical, we don't have direct correlations between things that are absolutely juxtaposed. We have instead sometimes quite abrupt transitions of texture, so that we don't see, for instance, the dermal patterning that one can witness on the deep side of the skin. Now we have epidermis, and we're all looking at that when we look at one another. Epidermis, right? But then the dermis itself is kind of a fibrous fishnet stocking of collagenous material underlying that. And if you kind of dissect the skin and peek under it, you see that in the Integral Anatomy series. I do that, and I liken it to the surface of the cantaloupe. But basically, I liken it to anything you want, but there's no one-to-one correlation between that fishnet collagenous map on the deep side of the skin to, say, the adipose tissue underneath it. It doesn't mean they're not in relationship, but they don't map in any one-to-one correlation. I would make the analogy then to the acupuncture system and say it's its own thing. It's its own energetic reality that has been perceived, documented, and worked with and modeled, right? Because it, too, is a reduction of the energetic body, right? The energetic body is infinitely more complex than, acupuncture transmission lines or chakras or whatever you might choose as an energetic model, right? The energetic body is infinitely complex. And in the same way that we can turn the physical body into a pile of muscles, we can turn the energetic body into a pile of acupuncture channels or chakras. And that is also just a reduction. And because we got to figure out some way to work with reality that our minds can handle, because reality itself is so far beyond us. And so, so with that being said, we have our energetic models. I see them as standalone in many ways, and I don't demand of them, and I don't witness in the body a one-to-one correlation between those standalone energetic models and the physical body. And I don't need it to. It's a confusion of the model. The model isn't valuable because it's true. The model is valuable because it's useful. right? It's its functionality, its usefulness. So, and so I find the acupuncture models or the chakra models or the physical models, for that matter, all very useful, but rarely capable of telling the whole story by themselves. And if you demand of a single model to tell an entire story, it will be a short story of reality, right? Because it's in principle a reduction. And so it's okay for acupuncture to not be dissected out of the body. It kind of drives me a little crazy, actually, when folks try to do that. And notwithstanding the keen interest folks have in more subtle aspects of human anatomy that may, be friends with those channels or something like that. But it's just not necessary, I don't think. It's functional without that correlation.
And of course, it speaks a little bit to this idea that each of these mats, these models, is whole within itself, but still partial to the greater whole. And of course, the map is not a territory.
Exactly. And we can also quote the famous Gil Hedley. I'm like Ben Franklin. I like to quote myself and say that we should hold our good practices dearly and the stories we tell about them very lightly, right? So it's that being the theory about our practice. So what we do that helps and serves humanity, keep doing it, celebrate it, teach it to others, do more service to suffering humanity, but don't get too dogmatic about your story about what you're doing, because chances are it's partial or even just flat out pathetically wrong.
Very, very true. On a much lighter note, I'm curious. You have all this deep insight into the body. You've spent all of these years now exploring it in such an amazing way. So, how do you look after yourself? How do you translate what you've learned into something pragmatic?
Oh, don't ask me to practice what I preach. It's you're saying, okay. True confessions. Dissection in a laboratory is an extremely physical process, no part of which is good for you. Right. So I have suffered gravely from my explorations, to be honest. And that's okay. My body is not my highest value, to be frank. It's a gift to be used. I'm not here to just preserve my body for the rest of my. I'm using my gift and I'm deploying it, and it's getting a little thin out from the effort. And that being said, for instance, 5 months in the laboratory doing the nerve project, I literally gave myself a frozen shoulder. Okay, I stabilized my hemostat hand in this position for hundreds and hundreds of hours in a short frame of time, over continually. Like I joke, people talk about yin yoga and it's got a 5-minute long posture. Try holding your shoulder in a position for 7 hours while you meticulously pick your way through some ridiculous thing, right? So this is what I've done, and it hurt. It was unusable when I started the tour. I couldn't even lift my arm, and now I can do this. So I have recovered it through conscious effort to not age myself so fast that I can't do another project, right? So I'm sort of in a pulse between sheer abuse of my body and then recovery, abuse and recovery. And it's worth it to me. I don't mind taking one for the team. And as I see the kind of things that I've done to myself, I can then be like, oh, okay, next project, I'm going to try and be more aware of that. Maybe each day after I do that, I will give time to opening the joint up again rather than shutting it down, if I can manage it. And sometimes I'm just like, fuck it, I just got to get this stuff done. I'll take care of it later. And so that's kind of how it's gone for me. I enjoy working in my yard. I have a big spacious yard in Colorado, and it's forever producing biomass it's like living in a pile of kindling on a dry hillside. And so I'm forever having the opportunity to clear debris, yeah, I've been pulling mullein for the last several days. Mullein is a herbal medicinal plant, but here it's an invasive, and it basically has these like soft leaves and then this tall stalk and with seeds at the top, and it's literally like kindling. I mean, there are thousands of these plants surrounding my house. So for the last several days, I've been pulling this invasive plant, and then so it's a workout. Yeah. While we're on the road in the camper,
But at least there's some measure.
Yeah. Yeah, we spent a year in the camper this year, traveling. I mean, we've been traveling since last October, and I've found it very difficult to be, physically active in a camper. We're driving thousands of miles. We've put 20,000 miles more on a camper. So there's a lot of time on your rear end, and then there's 8 hours of admin a day on top of the driving. And then when it's a production day, I'm dragging equipment through hallways at universities, setting up crazy giant screens and projectors and things, and then tearing it all down after talking for 6 hours. So it's intense, but I don't mind. Again, it's not my total physical comfort is not my highest value. I'm much more concerned to communicate. And if I can, along the way, recover myself, that's fabulous.
Yeah. Okay. So, thank you for sharing. I love the honesty within there as well. So as an almost final question, going now for over an hour, as an almost final question, I'm curious what you think we should be exploring in bodywork that you feel isn't being given enough attention, and where do you see manual therapy, physical therapy, such as Bowen, evolving over the next decade or so?
Oh, wow. Well, I think there's always more space in all of our touch therapies for acknowledgement of the contributing factors, let's say. We're not really going it on our own. If you pause when you put your hands on somebody and listen rather than just do, the body in its natural intelligence will communicate. And who knows what other intelligences might communicate. In other words, if you call for help from the angels, they will come. And it kind of takes the pressure off. And then all you have to do is create the container for connection. And within that intimate container of connection with another human being, when your intention is to serve and their intention is to welcome a connection that might be healing, literally legions of intelligences are just waiting for that moment for your ego to get out of the way and to be of service in a way that isn't so bossy and in control. So there's one notion. That would be amazing if there were a little more space for that, because we all have these aha moments like, "Hey, this is it. I know." It's like, "Why do you think you thought that?" You're instantly want to publish it and put a registered trademark on it and sell it. That's the human way. We're so mercantile and transactional in our use of knowledge, etc., rather than saying, "Oh my gosh, thank you, higher power, for enabling me to be present and witness to this healing of someone through the agency of the whole universe, as opposed to me." So there's one thing. Where's Bowen going in the next 10 years? Up in the air. It's such a beautiful modality that, and so many people could be practicing it. I think, and I like it because it's what I call it, and what others may also call an indirect technique. Right? You do your Bowen moves, and big things happen. Why? Because there's a higher phenomenon happening than the physical. You're triggering energetic phenomenon, as far as I can tell. And when you feel a Bowen move, it's not that different from being with a craniosacral biodynamic osteopath or something. Someone who's had 8 or 10 years of training as opposed to 2 weekends or whatever. But so there's a whole lot more weight, to be frank, with the touch of a 10 years experienced biodynamic craniosacral osteopath than there is from a Bowen practitioner. That being said, it's not far off the mark. You know what I'm saying? Like, again, so it just is that much more incumbent upon you to realize there's something happening here beyond me. And I don't have superpowers, but I can engage superpowers. Superpowers can work through me if I dare to be open and present to that potential.
And there's no doubt as well, having spoken to some of the longer-term Bowen teachers who are clocking 20, 30 plus years of practice. I mean, you know, with the 13 plus years that I've got within the kinesiology, done 20,000 clinical hours of practice. There's a big difference to what I experience now and what's happening for me now as I work with people compared to when I was doing those trainings all that time ago.
Yeah. So the thing is that you keep practicing, it keeps getting deeper, right? I'm sure you know that with respect to your martial arts, and it's certainly true with respect to any hands-on practice, really. If that's your thing, if that's your the thing that brings richness into your life, then it'll get richer and richer and richer and richer. I can't believe I'm stirred for my own part, having found my groove in dissection and teaching, that I'm still doing this. Because if you had asked me when I was 12 years old, what was I going to be when I grew up? It sure as heck wasn't whatever I'm doing now. And when I found that in my study of the body, it is literally bottomless. There is no end to it. Even in the most simple tissue, you think you've got it. You haven't got it yet. You know, there's more. It's like the whole universe is right there, and you can unpack it. You can experience that depth if you'll stay with it. But only stay with it because it's engaging you. Don't stay with it because you're trying to punish yourself or something.
I would really agree with that. You know, as a 12-year-old, I never would have expected that this is what I was doing with my life. And I haven't been bored in 20 years. I still find my work so engaging and so interesting. So
that's the true sign of a master. So good for you.
I wouldn't call that yet. For sure.
A master in the making.
Okay, Gil, thank you. Sure, I'll take that then. But I really want to thank you for your time and your energy today. You know, it's been such a rich amount of information that you've shared with us here. And I know that all of us within the Bowen Therapy Professional Association, our wider audience, we're going to really value this interview from shared. But just for anybody that would like to find out more about you, where are the best places for them to come and get hold of your work?
GilHedley.com has a ton of free stuff available, as well as a paid membership. So that's a good start, as well as my YouTube channel, which is pretty fun. It's called Seminot, but you can just type Gil Hedley on YouTube. I have over 100 videos up there. They're great just for learning stuff. It's mostly whiteboard conversation, and great for giving to your clients if I cover a wide range of topics. I've paused for the last year as we've been doing the Nerve Tour. I have not been able to simultaneously keep up with my channel, but there are over 100 videos up there already. That'll keep you busy for a while, in addition to all the free content on my website. And then if you really want to take the deep dive, and if you have a professional interest in anatomy, I can really stand behind my site as a deep resource for studying the body. It's over 300 hours of content up there now, both, lectures that I've given at keynotes and such like that, but the majority of it is actually me doing in the moment dissection in the laboratory and talking while I do so. and it'll make you feel like you're there. And I don't know if there's a much better, reasonably priced access for taking a deep dive into the human form than my site. So I'm proud of it now. It's quite a resource.
Beautiful. Thank you, Gil. We'll make sure that there are links to all of that in the video description that will be below. And I understand as well that the nerve tour, you're going to do a live stream to Europe on the 5th of January as well.
That is absolutely correct. We have many invitations from all over Europe, all over the planet, really, to bring the nerve tour abroad. And we'll look carefully into that and consider coming physically, which would be fun because I love to meet with people and there's a certain kind of energy in the room. But it's very different to confront the rules and regulations of many nations and their rules about making income in their country, etc., like that. I didn't want to lie my way across Europe as a vacationer who's actually working. And so I decided that it would be easier for my nervous system after visiting over 100 cities in North America to do these live streams. They will be fun. They will be engaging, and I will be awake for them no matter what. They'll be timed a little differently, so that they're accommodating to the locals. I think it's going to be like noon London time is when it'll start. And so all the Europeans can have an afternoon tea with me while I take them through a very deep dive into the nervous tissues of our body. We'll have so much fun. It'll be great.
Fabulous. Thank you, Gil. I'm going to be looking into that myself, and I hope to be attending for that. But again, thank you so much for all your time and enthusiasm. And actually,
sorry, I realize there's a time lag, and I spoke over you inadvertently, but I did want to mention that if you can't be there at the specific time of the event, like many Zoom sessions, it'll be recorded and available for 2 weeks after the fact on my site. So I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, no, brilliant. That's really good to know. And as well, just want to say a big thank you to everybody who's listened along. Your time and attention is always much appreciated for supporting us. And so thank you from me. This is Ben Calder for the Bowen Therapy Professional Association, the BTPA, and the amazing Gil Hedley of Integral Anatomy. Thanks, Gil.
Thank you. And thank you so much, folks who have listened in. I really appreciate your time and interest.